Hey everybody, I'm coming to you from Palm Springs, California. Actually, I think you're looking at Phil's picture right now, but I have a beautiful background of Palm Springs right here. And although it doesn't look like this in my backyard, as Phil noted. Phil was really kind to invite me to speak today. I think he usually does this presentation every year. I imagine this will be somewhat different. But I really look forward to talking to you about FileMaker 19. Some of you, if you're at Soliant, may have attended some sessions about the platform internally, and I don't know that you'll learn a lot from me beyond what you may have seen in those sessions, except that I intend to show some of the things I did wrong, and that may be helpful to you as well. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, which is here, and I'll get this started. And this is based on a deck prepared by Claris, which I've modified a little bit, but there'll be some stuff in here that reflects their marketing concerns. I'm going to speak, as Phil said, somewhere around an hour, and about 3/4 in, Steve's going to jump in and talk about AI and machine learning. So I am a senior FileMaker developer at Soliant Consulting, work with Phil Yaffe, and enjoy his ice cream. According to FileMaker, I've given my introduction. I'm going to speak about the product. There'll be demos along the way. There's some additional information they'd like you to see if we have time. And of course, we'll talk about, address your questions to the extent we can. Claris says that they offer the only path to deliver the modern custom apps your clients demand using a platform you already know. And I think that's true. But at the moment, I think it's more like we deliver modern custom apps that your clients don't yet know they need, and that we might not even know they need, especially in the AI machine learning space. And perhaps Steve will speak to this, but when I look at those features, I think, wow, none of my clients are asking for that yet. They don't even know that they could. And if they did, I don't know that I would know how to give it to them yet. So I look forward to what Steve has to say. I think that there's going to be a lot of new use cases that may actually change our client base to some extent due to those things, at least over time. And Claris makes powerful technologies available to everybody, including developers, which I assume is most of the folks at this meeting. So let's look at how the platform is opening up. You can now perform queries using what they call the FileMaker Data API, which is not the same thing as what we've been calling the Data API so far, but it uses the same syntax and it returns similar results. And we'll talk about that more in a bit. You can extend things further with JavaScript than basically, if you've been working with JavaScript already, probably you can't do anything entirely new, but you can do it significantly more easily. Another really exciting development are add-ons. They're kind of preview software at this point. There's a few things that don't work that well, but I think they're going to make a huge difference in the long run. Steve will talk about AI and machine learning and how you can get insights into your data from those. We can scan NFC tags and FileMaker Go, little unpowered, very near field tags. You have to get really close to them. And you can create apps in FileMaker Cloud and other cool stuff. So I'm going to start with the FileMaker Data API, and I'm going to talk about some of this stuff kind of in the abstract for a little bit, and then I think the greater benefit will be from looking at the demos. So there's a new script step called Execute FileMaker Data API, which sounds an awful lot like Execute SQL. But it works a little differently. You still send something like a query or a request to it, and you get a result. And the result can be put into a field or variables, up to you. And it can, one of the things that is nifty is that you can have it replace what's in the variable of the field, or you can have it append using the select entire contents, which I imagine you're used to doing with other script steps. So this script step specifies its own layout context, but it uses the existing found set for that context, I believe, for the window that is active, if that makes sense. One thing that's pretty nifty about it is that it incorporates uncommitted data although not changes to a field that you're actively changing. And when it does, it doesn't pull down the entire table the way Execute SQL does. One of the big liabilities of Execute SQL is that if you have uncommitted data, you get the whole darn table. If the table is big, it really affects the user's experience. It returns a JSON result, just like the real data API. And this is one of the great advantages over Execute SQL because JavaScript really handles JSON very gracefully and quickly. So you don't have to build your own JSON. If you use this command, it'll put together the JSON for you to hand over to JavaScript. It returns 3 nodes within its result, a response node, a data node, and a message node. The response is kind of a summary of the data you're getting back. The data is the data. And the message gives you an idea of whether it was successful or whether there were errors. It's very important to understand that it runs internally. You can run it even on a local file that has no connection to the internet. So it's not like the data API, which needs to have specific ports open and privileges. You can do this in the privacy of your own room. It returns errors that are exactly the same as the data API. So if you haven't worked with the data API a lot, and I would put myself into that group of people, it's really a good time to familiarize yourself with how it works, with its syntax, and with the errors it returns, because you can leverage it with your work with JavaScript as well now. So next, I'm going to look at how that new way of querying data ties into JavaScript. And here's some pretty pictures from FileMaker or Claris Marketing about what you can do with JavaScript. Since Phil has spoken to you about Carafe, I imagine you're already aware that you can do some pretty great stuff with your interface, extend your interface in lots of great ways. So JavaScript allows you to leverage open source libraries, bring all kinds of other people's work into your interfaces. You can embed interactive objects and improve visualization and activity. I'm sure this is stuff that you're familiar with. You may not have considered that it's also a good way to offload complex calculations. The JavaScript engine is really fast at some kinds of calculations, faster than the FileMaker engine. And I couldn't tell you when it's faster and when it's slower, but Wim has done some interesting benchmarking on this, and he'd be a good guy to ask about when you might consider using JavaScript to come up with some answers to your complex calculation questions. So a new script step allows you to directly from script say, I want to perform JavaScript, right? I want to name which web viewer is involved. I want to call a function and I want to send parameters. So I can name the web viewer, just the object name. If I have multiple web viewers, I can use whichever, I can specify whichever web viewer is relevant to the function that I want to call. I can pass parameters, which are then received in order, right? Just the way JavaScript works, where you name a function and then you list your comma-separated parameters. I can send those parameters over. I'm curious whether, now that this is actually incorporated into a script step, whether this might have long-term influence on how parameters are handled in FileMaker Pro. It's important to know that when you perform a JavaScript in the web viewer through a script, it waits for the function to complete. So it's sort of like when you call a script on the server, you perform a script on server, and you wait for that to complete. It also returns a getLastError code or various codes, and one of them will indicate that the viewer didn't finish loading. And it works with Pro, Go, and WebDirect, which is pretty great. Although WebDirect may have subtle differences in how it functions. The complement to that script step is a JavaScript function called FileMaker.PerformScript. So this is actually within your JavaScript in the web viewer. And typically it's the last thing you do in your JavaScript. And all you can do with it is name a script that you want to call and then pass a single parameter. However, that parameter could be a JSON package, wrapping up a whole bunch of different parameters for your FileMaker script to extract. So it runs the FileMaker script. Essentially, JavaScript invokes the FileMaker script is probably a better way to say it. It's going to run in the current FileMaker context. That's pretty important to remain aware of. It sends this optional parameter, which is potentially JSON. It does not return anything back to JavaScript, and the script call is asynchronous. It does not wait. JavaScript doesn't wait for the FileMaker script to complete. So those two things could continue to execute in parallel. So I'm already ready to look at some demos. So I'm going to exit out of that and go look at what we got here. I'm going to start with a simple demo, which is essentially a ripoff from Wim. He presented something like this, and he's written about it in blog posts. And I think I want to start here. So this is kind of a silly use case because you can do this in FileMaker and it's not very sophisticated, but I've got a list of people and I have their current ages and I want to know the average age for all these people. And so I'm going to do that within JavaScript as well as within FileMaker. I'm going to have a layout that the data API references. The data API is going to go pull, if I had multiple, I guess I'll talk about that in a minute, but essentially the data API, when it reads stuff off of a layout, it's going to take every field that you have on the layout. And I'm only interested in passing the age, so that's the only field I have here. And then I'm going to have a web viewer, which has my JavaScript code, and I'll talk about some of the stuff here. So let's just go ahead and step through my script, and I'll talk about how it's behaving and what it's doing as we go. So first, I'm going to go to my data API layout with that single field. And I'm going to get the found count of the records. Right now I have all records found. And I'm also just going to grab the average from FileMaker's point of view so that I can compare it. So now I know how many records are found on this layout. That's an important piece of information to have. And I'm going to pause for a minute to let the web viewer load properly, which troubles me. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. And now I'm going to set up my query. So essentially, I'm going to do a little chunk of JSON here with two data points: the name of the layout that I want to query and the number of records I want to pull from that layout. And since I found the found count, I'm going to say I want all 1,000 records from the records that are in the found set. I could say I only want 10, I only want 100, especially if I wanted to page through them or something, but I'm going to get them all. And then I'm going to run the execute FileMaker data API command, passing this, this query and returning the result into a variable I'm calling JSON. So I'm going to run that, and let's go see what I get back. Oh, actually, I'm going to let it format the elements first. Well, you'll see first you get, overwhelming, inscrutable data. So then I'm going to format the data, and it'll be a little easier to look at. Here's the messages node. It's telling me that there is no error code and everything is okay. And then here's my response with a data object. And it has another subnode, field data, which actually contains the fields on the layout. If I had 10 fields on the layout, there would be 10 different value pairs within the field data object. Is that an object? I'm sorry. And then it's going to tell me some other stuff. If there was a portal on the layout, it would tell me about the portal. It's going to tell me the record ID. And I have forgotten what the mod ID is, but I'm guessing that it has to do Does anybody know? Does anyone want to jump in and tell me what that is? I want to say that it's about modification, but that's a total guess.
How many times the record's been modified, I believe.
Oh, okay, great. That makes sense. And since I've been through all these records in I made the same big replaces across them, that's why it's the same for all of them. Okay, great. So I've got a whole bunch of data, and then way down at the bottom, here's my summary of what happened, right? The database, the found count, the layout that I queried, how many records came back, what the table was, etc. So there's my package of JSON data. Next, I'm going to perform the function in the web viewer, and we should probably go look at that, but let's go ahead and just do it. And it calls this perform script, right? Which is actually invoking a second script. So now I'm jumping from, in a script stack, I'm throwing another script on top. And I'm getting my JavaScript results, and it says the average is 35.059. And now I'm back to the other script because that one finished executing, and it's going to go through its business, and it's going to give me the average that I calculated at the beginning, and they're the same. So it seems like both techniques are working. So let's go look at the web viewer. I probably should turn off my video. I had forgotten to do that. I'm going to keep looking up at the ceiling the whole time. Let me quickly do that. So I think that is here, and I'm stopping my video. Okay, bye-bye. It's a picture of me looking at the ceiling. Great. Okay, anyways, back to the web viewer. I'll get rid of the debugger. I've got this is the code that I'm putting into the web viewer, and this is the web viewer rendering that code. So let's go through this first. It's a very simple HTML and body with a little bit of text explaining what the web viewer is about. And the important thing is what's between the two script tags. I have a function that's called receive.json, and it has a single parameter input. And then I'm going to parse that input using a JavaScript function that does that for me. And I'm going to step through so essentially I'm going to put the JSON response data into this data variable. Then I'm going to step through every one of the items in the data array, pulling off the age for each one of those, data points that you saw in the JSON, and adding it all together, and then I'll divide it by the number of records, and that gives me the average. And then I use the function to call that second script, which simply opens a dialog and tells me what this result is. This is extremely simple, but helpful as a starting point to understand how this all works. And if I go into layout mode, you'll see that literally what I'm putting into the web viewer is the name of the field where I put that HTML and JavaScript. I want to point out a couple of things that I needed to do to make this work. One is that I need to tell the web viewer to allow JavaScript to perform FileMaker scripts, because if I don't, then it can't make that call back. I believe I also have to, in extended privileges for each privilege set that's going to use this feature, I believe I have to allow URLs to run FileMaker scripts also to allow the same thing to happen. So there's two places to make the callback possible. And this seems a little counterintuitive since it doesn't describe really what's happening, but there you have it. I had a problem. If we go back to the script, when I first wrote this, I didn't have this pause here. And as a result, when I switched contexts, there wasn't enough time for the web viewer to load. Let's just go ahead and try it like this. You can see I'm getting a code 5, error code 5, which I believe, is about the fact that the web viewer wasn't ready to process the JavaScript. And it bugs me that I actually have to slow things down in order to make the web viewer work, at least with this approach. So I did another approach. here, I'm going to go to the, yes, this is it. Here I have this, the data API layout, the one that I'm going to query the data from. I'm putting everything on it, which also seems to me a little sloppy. There've got to be best practices to this that I am not following that either will evolve or that some of you already know. But I put my field here. This is that one field that I want to get the data in. I put my web viewer. This time I put my HTML into just a text object. And then I'm just grabbing the object attribute. I've named this web HTML, and I'm grabbing this attribute and putting it into the web viewer. So I don't need to use a field from another table. And when I perform the query here, I'm going to my data API layout. I'm getting the found count just as before. I'm getting the average just as before, but then I'm not changing context. And the web viewer is already on the layout, so it's already loaded. And so I don't have to have my timeout, my little delay, right? The pause. So things are very similar. It's the exact same syntax. I'm just talking about a different layout, which is the one that I'm on in my query. I'm getting the same results, which I can demonstrate if I can get the data viewer up. Let's go one more step to get it formatted. So you can see I'm getting exactly the same results as before. It doesn't matter whether I'm on the data API layout when I run the execute FileMaker data API or not. It does matter that I have the found set that I want. And I'll demonstrate that before we stop. So again, I'm getting my JavaScript response. It's the same. And really the only difference here is that I cut out the layout switch so that I didn't have the web viewer load issue. So I guess the one more thing I want to show with this particular example is how do I do this most easily? I think I'm going to switch to the other layout, and I'm going to go just to the first two records, right? I'm going to omit everything else. Okay, so I've just got two records here, 40 and 14. So I should get the average of those two if things are working right. And it doesn't really matter which approach I take. So I think I'll just go to the original one. And I'm going to perform the query. Actually, it's more interesting to do it here because we aren't in the layout context, right? So come on, debugger. There we go. So let's see. I'm still getting the found count from that other layout. That's correct. And it should be 2. There it is, right? And then I am performing the query and formatting the results. And you can see now I've only got 2 data points. I'm not on that layout. I'm on a layout with an entirely different context. But I got a found set previously. And so when I call the data API, it respects the found set that or it insists on using the found set that I have in place. So it's really important to be aware of it. And I'm getting a new average, right? I think this is a good point to take some questions.
Mark, I could chime in two little things.
Great.
It's maybe worth pointing out that there are other ways to achieve a found set with the data API. The way you're illustrating, which is like taking it from whatever's on the layout, is handy because it lets you do a FileMaker find, but the data API supports query parameters as well.
Okay, that's great. So as I said before, it's time, if you haven't learned about the data API yet, this is a good moment to do it. Do you want to, should we just say that, or do you want to actually illustrate that for a moment in chat or something?
No, I mean, basically just look up, when you get around to playing with it, like you said, look at the documentation in the help text, and it's pretty clear what you can do. Basically, you just add more, similar to what you did with, if you pull up the one that you've constructed already, which is a JSON object,
yeah.
You will see there, you have like the limit argument and stuff like that. There's other arguments that you'll that exist for the data API, which you just put in there basically your find criteria in a similar.
Okay. Great. So everything that I've said about context is potentially, well, it's true if you don't specify those parameters, but essentially you don't need to set up context because the data API is entirely independent of context if you want it to be. Is that the right way to say it?
Right, or even maybe more interesting for those who maybe have used the data API and thought you had to do the query is that you actually can inherit the FileMaker found set, which is a pretty neat trick. So the fact that you can do it, it works both ways is an advantage.
Great.
The other thing is, I think you mentioned the FMP URL. It's possible that I'm mistaken on this, but I'm virtually certain that you actually don't need the FMP URL if you're not going to use FMP URLs, if you're just going to do perform FileMaker script.
Okay. But somehow I had understood in one of those meetings that you needed this, but I'm happy to be corrected on that.
Yeah, before I said that, I went in and just double checked the file that I'm working on with those features, and I don't have that privilege set enabled, and it works fine. So
Great.
I hadn't read anything about it, but that would have been the first I'd heard of it. But I think that's actually not necessary. It's only relevant to the actual FMP URL.
Okay, cool. Anybody else have comments or questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. That was really, I did not realize that it was respecting the found set as well. I had done more like the traditional data API where you set the query when I was playing around with it. Just want to confirm, it's not just getting those first two records because that was what your limit was set as, was the found count. It just took the first two records. Like if you displayed like record 999 and 1000, it would average those two. It does respect the found count, not just the first two records.
Yes.
Okay.
The limit is for deciding how many records to return. I don't think it's like an index pointer or something. I imagine there might be an index pointer, but you'd have to go look at the help desk for the help info for that. So yeah, I think the limit is just how many records you want back.
Yes, correct. I just want to make sure that the limit wasn't what was causing you just to get the two records of the found set back.
I mean, if I said 1, I would get the first of the 2, right? And if I had 1,000 and I said 100, I would get the first 100.
Okay.
Right?
No, but I think I see his point, which is that it could be just 2, and it might, if you had your found set was from the middle of the found set, it might actually, I mean, he's asking if it would return 2 records because that was the limit you set, but actually just the first 2 records in creation order instead of the first 2 in your found set.
Right. Am I wrong about that, Jeremiah? I was thinking, let's try it. So let's see, if we go ahead and I want to be careful not to take too much time on this, but I think it's an interesting question. So I'm going to omit a few, and then I'm going to omit the rest. And I never remember that command. Okay. Okay, so now we have 36, 49, and 10. Let's find out what we get. And I'll go back again to this one. And let's see. There's my query. And here's my JSON. So it would be interesting to find out if I'm wrong. We're getting 40, 14, and 9, which sounds like it's not respecting the found set, right? 40, 14, and 9.
Correct.
So,
yeah, those are your first 3. You look at your record IDs, those are your first 3 records in that table.
Yep, so you were right. Oh, and I just went to the wrong place.
I was excited that it respected the found count. I thought that was a neat little trick.
That would be great.
I was too.
yeah. Well, it just seems intuitive that it would if you can work with the found set at all. It seems sort of like it certainly undermines the usefulness of this. But oh well. Okay.
No, in fact, the use case that was who was saying that, Jeff? Whoever was saying that.
It's Chris.
Chris, yeah, I was speaking up.
Was referring to, and that I was referring to, is actually one of the is actually a very powerful one, which is, is that you actually don't need to be bound by context. So in a similar manner to the way the execute SQL is context independent, it's actually one of the primary use cases for the data API. Is you,
of course, yeah, that makes sense.
Kind of headlessly specify a layout, and it goes and runs the query that you specify without having to. I mean, there is this weird aspect of the whole kind of, I don't know, FileMaker architecture, where essentially the fields that are returned in the quote unquote view are bound to the layout that you define. But defining the layout is only going to define which fields are returned in the result.
Yes.
It shouldn't affect anything about the found set.
Okay. So I'm going to move on from this now because there's a lot more to talk about, but I think this was really useful and I certainly learned something. So there you go. I think we are done with this demo file. So I'm going to switch over to my other one, which is the FileMaker demo file, but I played with it a little bit and I think the way I played with it will be useful. So we've already talked about these two things, and this is the very simple interactive example that they provide, where there is an interface element here. I can modify various aspects of the interface element, especially if I could spell. If I submit that, you'll see that this is being sent over to FileMaker, right? So that is going to be a perform script. And then from this direction, I can change these. And I hit that, and it's going back to JavaScript and setting values there. So let's look at the script portion here. I'm going to start over on, well, so this is the form submit, right? It's simply getting data points from each of these elements and then assembling them together. It's not using JSON to assemble them, which seems sort of silly. I mean, why not if we're living in JSON land? And then it's sending that to a script called store data from web form, which is writing these values to these fields. And let's go look at that briefly just to make that clear. Here we go. It's literally, that's all it's doing. It's grabbing the script parameter that was passed over, which is line break separated, and then writing each of those 3 separated values to 3 fields, period, end of story, that's it. From the other direction, this is calling this function. So, and you can see that WebDirect needs a little time to let the web viewer finish loading. The thing that bugs me about this little time is that if we're hoping for improved performance from the web viewer, whatever we choose to do in it has to have a sufficient advantage that this pause, is accounted for, right? If it's an interface situation, then that's less important. But if we're using the web viewer for efficient calculations, we need to be processing sufficient data that the potential need for loading is sort of taken into account. So here we are performing JavaScript in the web viewer. We're calling the setUserData function, and we're sending 3 parameters which line up with the 3 parameters for the function. And then we're simply setting these elements, we're getting them by their ID, and then we're setting their values to the parameters that we're sending over. So it's just, literally taking these values and writing them here, and taking these values and rewriting them here, back and forth. More interesting, and actually I want to show you something in order to get there. Let's see. Here's the layouts in this system, in this solution. I might get over here. If I go into layout mode, and if I hit Command Option K, I get a spotlight search. Unfortunately, I need to do this again so I can see everything at once. There we go. So you can see if I type demo, it pulls up the 2 layouts with the word demo in them. So there's a really nice layout spotlight search that's been added to 19 that I think if you haven't used it yet, you'll find very, very useful. So I'm switching to another demo now, I just figured that would be a fun way to get there. This is a little more sophisticated. And I need to get it, to refresh. Interesting. I wonder if I...
Is there a load? Is there a load script that needs to run first?
Yeah, probably. I thought it was right on the layout, like the layout needed to do it, but let's go back and go there. Yep, you're right. So this is the original demo that came from Claris in this file. And it's got a pretty nifty visualization where if I hover over different segments of the data being displayed, it breaks them down, right? And then over here, I can do it from either side. The piece that demonstrates interactivity is that I can click on this and it changes how this portal down here is filtered, right? So it's showing me the small, medium, and large records in the portal, or it's showing me recurring or auctions, various sources of donations. Additionally, the other direction, it illustrates the other direction because I can change this and it causes a script trigger then to modify or to reload this so that this new data, changed data is accounted for here. So let's see how that is being done. There are various text objects containing the code that says like styles and the D3JS code. The important one here is the actual chart, and way down you can see, here it is. There's a PerformScript, which simply sends a parameter back that represents the area that you clicked on. And I won't dig any deeper into figuring out how that parameter gets calculated, but essentially it is, it's going to be, I think, a value pair, we can go see in the script, saying what kind of data we want to filter in the portal and then what the filter value will be. So let's go into browse mode again and watch it happen. Here's the debugger. So I'm going to click on this. So JavaScript is calling FileMaker using that function. We're receiving the parameter that's been sent over. That parameter is got various things in it that we don't care about, but it does have the recurring, which is the type of donation, and the value. And really all we care about is this, is that right? No, we want, I think we want both. We'll have to go look at the script. So here we go. Yeah, so actually it's whether it's primary or secondary and classification and source. These are the two things we're looking for. So we're essentially setting a global portal filter to portions of this parameter that are being returned from the JavaScript, the ones that are relevant to us, and then refreshing the portal to make sure that it shows the values. Similarly, I'll just go ahead and close that. There's a trigger on this so that when you modify, when you save the data in the field, it's going to write back to the web viewer with updated data. And it's quite simple. We're just sending, in fact, I think we're literally just refreshing it. And it's pulling the data. Let's see if I can remember. We can go look at that. We're sending the name of the web form, the rating, and the color. Why? Let's watch it happen. All right. Oh, okay, because I was looking at the wrong script. I was like, what the hell, that makes no sense. So let's go look at the right script. it's resetting the data object and then passing it over. So that makes a lot more sense. There's a relatively sophisticated data object being provided to the web viewer to visualize what we're talking about. And that's just getting updated. So one thing that I like to do just to understand examples like this is I was a little dissatisfied with the fact that I could click on this and it would change the portal, but then when I moved away, the portal and the data no longer matched. And I wanted to explore whether it would be a better user experience to have the visualization remain the same when I clicked on you know, any one of these options. So in order to do that, I needed to understand the various pieces involved. And the 3 scripts that were relevant are these 3 here. One, which is the layout editor that Phil mentioned, and then the set data in web viewer, which we were just looking at when you change a value in the portal, and then a script which filters the portal, or in the new case, finds records, because in the new version, let's see, I need to view the status toolbar. Let's go up here. In the new version, I have changed the context to the actual sources of donations, and I have a self-referencing portal. So, and I need to refresh the window. Maybe that'll be enough. Maybe not. Maybe I actually have to call the script. So let's do that. Well, this time it's not working. Anybody have some thoughts on what I should be doing to trigger this thing to work for the first time? I'm not entirely clear. Let's just go look at this. So this is calling main nav demo. This isn't a problem I ran into when playing with it, so I'm surprised. I'm just going to hack it for the minute and see. I don't see why this would help, but I'm going to try it anyway. Yeah, I wonder if I broke something in the last few minutes playing with this. But I can still talk about the idea here. Essentially, it's rather than having a filtered portal, I have a self-referencing portal, right? So that it's showing the found set, and then I'm changing the found set when I am clicking on those 2 sides of the visualization. And I like to sort of have an empty area off to the left of all of these data objects, because then I can just let them unfold and find my way to the place I need to change. Here is my V2. I needed to change the script, the function that calls the script to the V2. And then I can just throw it away after it's unfolded. And that's the only change I needed to make over here. And then similarly, if we look at the script trigger on this, I simply needed to change it to my new version. And if we look at the scripts, where are they? Here. So one thing I did to make this simple is I just added 3 summary fields, which come up with, I wonder if I need to explain this a little more. Let's go see this. So here, the data object that I was talking about earlier, if we look at the original one, it is getting a list of the related values, right? We're in a context of donations, looking at a portal of sources and visualizing those related sources. That's the original example. So I need to do a list of the related values. Now, in the new version, I'm simply doing a list field, a summary field, and pulling them directly from the found set. That's the only difference. And there's a little redundancy here. Literally the same data object setting is happening in 2 different scripts, which is true in the original example. And then finally, rather than filtering the portal. If you remember, the original one is setting these portal filters based on the data coming back from the web viewer. Now I'm performing finds based on the same returned data. And you know, if I could, I would show you how beautiful that is. But it's not working, so I think I'll just move on. Are there any questions, having seen a slightly more sophisticated implementation of the script step and the function? Was that clear enough, or did I just sort of jump around and confuse you?
Hello, Mark.
Hey there.
This is Jeff, and I'm just kind of curious, not familiar with this, but I'm curious what this calculation behind that web viewer looks like. If you were to define the web viewer, yeah, what is that thing?
Okay, so this is, do you remember my earlier example where I had a text object on the layout and then I was pointing at it? This does the same, exactly the same technique. And that text object is this one labeled Sankey chart. There's a whole bunch of code here that's actually getting loaded into global variables at different points, but the most relevant piece is this one. And you can see that it's within script tags here, it's loading these other global variables, which are being pulled from these two things, I think, here. And then there's additional JavaScript, which is the stuff that actually causes the web viewer to show what it's showing. And it's been, you know, it's been annotated pretty well. So we're getting the web viewer dimensions, we're setting the desired colors, we're creating SVG images that actually, you know, show what's going on. And then there are transform attributes that I think take those SVGs and distort them to make these beautiful flowing things. And we're adding headers for the different labels that we've got. I mean, there's a lot going on here. Is that enough, or do you want to dig into this further?
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, your whole JavaScript is in there.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason that I like to have the original example had all this stuff kind of shoved over to the left. In fact, I think I can just show it. Let's see. See how this stuff is kind of to the left and down? I think they were trying to stay out of the top navigation, for one thing. But also, I just find it frustrating if I want to look at one of these things that then it unfolds and then I have to resize it when I'm done. So I like, when I'm working, I just like to have like a scratch area where I can copy any one of the elements that I need to play with. And then when I'm done, I just delete it. I mean, and of course, you have to be sure that you actually copy it and you don't drag it over and delete it, because then your code is gone. But I just find it useful to have an open space to look at this stuff.
If only there was a more convenient way to work with Java.
Like something called Claris? Indeed. I asked Phil how much I should talk about Claris, and he says that this group has heard a great deal about it, so I won't flog it too much. But I will say that these improvements to JavaScript within the product do not make Claris irrelevant. And if anything, they make it, it's going to make it that much easier to use it. And it's the whole idea of a JavaScript repository is really a good idea, because working this way is pretty clunky. Any other comments or questions? All right, I'm gonna move on then. So let's go back to the presentation for a moment. I think add-ons are pretty exciting, and they're going to encourage us to think more modularly and even perhaps than we already are. Add-ons are packages of XML representing, really representing almost an entire FileMaker file. I'll talk about that in a minute. They don't include absolutely every FileMaker element. I know that they don't include accounts. I'm not sure if there are any others that they leave out as well. The future of add-ons is that we can share them with each other or even sell them as products. And they encourage a modular approach because they can be uninstalled. And if you imagine an add-on that contains a bunch of tables and relationships, if you tie those into your solution and make your solution dependent on those connections and then uninstall the add-on, you're going to have a broken solution. So it's a good idea to think of them as little modules that are very gently and loosely tied to whichever solution you're creating. And then there's some pictures from the marketing materials talking about how you can drag add-ons into a layout. I have not been successful at doing this yet. So someone at this meeting encouraged me not to talk about add-ons very much and to kind of talk about them as a preview feature. I am going to talk about them a little more than that, but be aware that this is a feature in development. I think it's still growing and changing, and you want to be careful with it. There is a new script step called Save a Copy as Add-on Package, and I'm going to show you how to use it. Essentially, it lets you identify a window, and not necessarily in the file that you're in, and that window says, okay, whatever file this window is part of, package that up as a bunch of XML called an add-on package. And that add-on package, literally by running this step here, all that XML gets stored with your installation of FileMaker 19 and will appear as an add-on in any file that you work with thereafter. And we'll talk about that in a second. UUIDs, the best of my understanding around this is that when you create an add-on, it gets a certain set of UUIDs, perhaps the ones from the file that you're packaging, I'm not sure. But if you want to create a second add-on with a variation that has the same name, you need a new set of UUIDs, or FileMaker won't recognize it as something new and will replace your add-on with the changes that you've made. This is not something I've experimented with exactly, so I may not be telling the entire truth on this, but it's something you could play with. You could play with what happens if you replace UIDs or if you don't. So essentially, you're saving an entire file as an add-on, and what you put in that file limits how complex the add-on is. You can call this step from a different file. In fact, I recommend it, because if you have a script with this step in it in the file that's your add-on, then that script will be part of the add-on. And the UUIDs will make your add-on unique. And one thing I will implore is that the add-ons that I see in Claris 19, and maybe because they're not working perfectly, I find them a little inscrutable. I don't really know what to do with them. And I can't tell if they're broken or if I just don't know how to use them sometimes. So perhaps you could include a layout in your add-on that says how to use it. So let's look at that for a minute. Let's see. So I actually did several different add-ons. I think I'm going to start with a simple one first. So here's my produce picker. This is actually a picker from Jeremy Bonte from the past that lets you type ahead and get values. And that's pretty much what this is. If we look quickly at and I'm going to need to wrap this up in about 15 minutes so that there's maybe 10 minutes so that there's time for machine learning. You can see that there's just a couple of tables. There's a relationship. That relationship is showing some related data here. There's just the one script with Jeremy's Perfom quick find script.
Mark, you're demonstrating creating an add-on?
Yes. Oh, it's true. Let's go with the way I'm doing this. It's kind of the cart before the horse, but oh well, we'll get there. So, and then there's a series of layouts. So this is a file that I want to create an add-on from, and partly I'm doing creating add-ons because I have more faith in that than in some of the add-ons that are in the product at the moment, or at least I understand it better. As I said, with some of those, I've used them, and then I'm like, how does this really work? So I have a little script called make the add-on, and it's in my own little make the add-on file. And it's really simple. All it does is it it asks me the window name that I want to identify, and then it runs that one script step, identifying the window. And for the moment, I'm not replacing UUIDs. So I click this, and it tells me what windows I have open across multiple files, right? It's not just the one file that I'm in. And I'm going to say produce picker, and it's going to run that script step, and it's literally creating a little package of XML in the add-on modules folder within the extensions folder of my FileMaker. Actually, application support, so it's library application support. So it's going to be across versions. So it's not just folded up under FileMaker 19. So within that, you see there are a few images, the icons. These icons come from the icon associated with the file. So you can give, where is this? File options. The icons that you give the file. You can have your own unique icons that you give to your add-on by putting those on the file. So let me just create a new file now. And I'll call it Untitled. What the heck? And you see in layout mode, there is now a new option, Add-Ons. And at the moment, I have no add-ons installed in this particular file. I go and I click that little plus in the lower left, and then here are various kinds of add-ons available to me. These are all prepackaged ones. Some of them just provide tables. Actually, all of these, I think, include interface elements, at least the ones that I've tried. And then here are the ones that I've created. So this is the one that I just did. And it actually, I had one here and it overwrote it because I didn't change the UUIDs. I'm going to choose it, and now it's in my file. The piece that I don't fully understand is with some add-ons, if you drag the add-on over, it starts to build an interface, some interface elements that you can customize. Yeah. And I don't get that. And it's not really working well for me.
So there actually is there's no official documentation on that. What the piece you're missing, I think it was shared through the ETS program and stuff like that, is there are some naming conventions. You have to have a specially named layout and a specially named group on that layout. And there's definitely more to come on that. That's why I think this is really, the place to focus on is add-ons that have been already created and have been established. If you want to play with add-ons, creating your own add-ons is very Wild West right now. Definitely, some of the problems that you're struggling with, Mark, are problems that other people have. Some people like people like Geist and myself and stuff have started trying to figure out workarounds. There's actually some encoding bugs that are still part of that are still that shipped. So sometimes you make add-ons. The XML actually has
I think what we're going to say is, do this at your own risk and probably only for exploration and not for production work. But I still think going through this process, even if I've missed some of these specific layout, there's the conventions that allow the drag and drop. I still think this is interesting and useful to see. So, and it may be that, in fact, you can ignore some layouts and ignore some scripts. Maybe that's also something that I've missed, Jeremiah, that would make some of the weird things that I'm doing not necessary. But I still think it's pretty nifty that literally having just added the add-on here, it has produced the tables and relationships. And again, this may all have to do with the naming conventions we talked about, right? The
naming convention is only for the draggable element, and you can't exclude anything except the only thing that's excluded is the actual layout that's specially named. So you do need to be careful. I mean, the point you made about putting your deployment script in another file is one way people have done it. The way I actually favor doing it is putting it as a single script step attached to a button on the specially named layout, which is not in the specially named group. That's the only things that don't get deployed. So.
Oh, cool. Okay, great. I like that. But let's see. So we can see that the layouts that I asked for have been created. They have the exact same look and feel. Thank God that wasn't always true. The scripts have been created. Essentially, every element in the file that I built has been ported over to this file. And to some extent, you can just achieve this by having a starter file, right? We all have little starter files that we use as a way to get going on something. But if we think more modularly, we can start bringing things like this into existing files, things we've already started. I have a few concerns beyond what Jeremiah has mentioned so far. One thing that I discovered was that if I think I'll skip the process of actually creating these add-ons, but I took an existing file that I had worked on and made an add-on from it, and I'm going to add it to this file. Well, actually, let's not add it to this file. Let's create a new file. Let's make it clean. So let's try just another one, Untitled 2. And I'm going to add it. I think it's, this was the original. And you can see that that file had its own icon. And as a result, it came over with my add-on. So that's how you get icons on these different things. If I try to install this, it crashes FileMaker. And I discovered that the file had some subtle damage that was causing that. So I would be very careful about using existing files as the starting point, like stripping down an existing file to produce an add-on, rather than building something from scratch in FileMaker 19. I think the safest course of action is to literally start with something new, not use anything that's been developed in 17 or 18, start with something new in 19 and build it from the ground up. I did that, let's see, I actually took the same, I wanted to I just got, I got stubborn and I wanted to actually get that add-on to work. So I spent a good time rebuilding that particular thing. Oh, actually, this is the one. From the ground up in 19, and now it doesn't crash. That's, anyways, I wanted to give some sense of how complex you can really bring over a lot of stuff. There's a few weirdnesses here. I see some funky buttons that don't exist in the original file as far as I can tell. They seem to be copies of these. But with very few exceptions, I'm getting a very faithful rendition of a pretty sophisticated interface that allows me to move. This could be I had a client who had documents that were composed of smaller PDFs that needed to be ordered. So this doesn't have to just be about release and tracks. It could be about anything where you order component parts. Just a nice drag, assembling things kind of interface. I want to see if there's anything else I want to tell you about this. It's just it really recreates a lot of infrastructure if you need it to. I think probably we're mostly looking for relatively small modular pieces that aren't quite so specific. Like part of the challenge to us is to make these more generic and say, okay, what does this do? It's about ordering component parts. How do I name these pieces so that they're more generic, et cetera. But I really am excited about where add-ons are going, and I hope that, with relative speed, maybe with the next release, they're going to be a little more easy to understand and perhaps more reliable. So that's, I think, what I wanted to show there. Are there any questions about that for me or for Jeremiah? I think then that we can switch over to Steve to talk about AI and machine learning.
All right. Hello. Mark, do you want to transfer the screen over to me?
I do, but my mouse is misbehaving. Let me kill that. There we go. Okay.
Okay. And how do we share the screen?
At the
There we go.
okay.
Okay. Give me a moment. I have not allowed Ring Central.
While Steve's getting that set up, I just want to introduce him. So this is Steve Gleason, who's a member of CAFTA, an independent developer, and he's going to do the machine learning part.
You know, I'm going to need to, system preferences needs me to quit and come back in, so I'll be out for just a second.
Oh, actually, it'll let you do that without quitting. It warns you that that needs to be restarted, but it'll work.
So let's try it. There we go.
There you go.
Okay. So FileMaker 19 now uses Core ML models. And there's a couple things that you need to know about Core ML. It is specific to the Apple ecosystem only, meaning you can use it in FileMaker Go and FileMaker Pro on the Mac. But then there are also instances where you can perform a script on server if FileMaker server is running on a Mac. As of right now, FileMaker can only use two types of Core ML models. Those are vision and text. Vision has a few more options to it than text does. And the models do need to be loaded into memory to be used. The best way to think about it is it's kind of a temporary local API or a plugin, but the models that you load in are static. So it better be pretty good. There are several different use cases. Claris shows an example of like an auto parts store where someone brings in a part and they take a picture of it and identifies it as a piece for a 1978 Mercury Comet. Some other business uses are sentiment detection, trying to tell if your customers are happy either visually or in their text messages. Or like me, if you're completely inscrutable and stone-faced. There's image classification options like the parts ID, like I was mentioning. Also, it can be used for digital asset management. If you have a very explicit naming convention and folder structure for your images, being able to scan an image and having it identify different forms of classification means that you can file images automatically. And then there's also some pattern recognition options that tends to be used for movement, facial ID, license plate ID. You can get the models a number of different places. Apple has an existing set of vision models, and they have a few text models. And this has been out in the field for years. The Turi community and the TensorFlow community have a tremendous number of models, and there are tools available on GitHub that will allow you to convert those to Core ML models that you can use in FileMaker. And then Apple has their own tool that I'm going to show you in a minute on the right called Create ML, which allows you to create your own. And it's extremely easy to work with. A few considerations that you need to have. The model is static. So the model that you start with is the model that you're going to use. So you need to have good quality data. When you're using somebody else's model, you kind of don't know what the data you're working with is. There are a lot of examples of algorithmic bias, and I'm going to put some links for this in the chat, but I just want to jump to a couple examples. This is a very good, very lengthy article about different instances of algorithmic bias. Stanford has a good visual thing, like right here. What are you seeing? You're seeing bananas, or bananas with a sticker on them. Or
Steve, you might be just sharing your one application.
Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. Now you're seeing my full screen. Can you see the screen now? Okay. So this is an example. If you're seeing bananas there, you might say this is bananas with a sticker or bananas on a shelf, or bananas in a store. But it isn't until someone would show you something like this, where you'd say these are green bananas or unripe bananas. So you don't say things like these are yellow bananas, because it's just kind of inferred. So there are all types of examples where different types of algorithms might have biases that might be based on Eurocentric language, or a data set that's got a preponderance of images that feature a lack of diversity. So there are things like hand dryers and soap dispensers that have been shown images of the engineers who have worked on them, but the engineers haven't had a lot of cultural diversity, so they don't react as well to people of different skin colors. So it's important to be mindful of different types of biases that can come into the models that you're working with. And I'll put some links there in the notes. So here's an example of a typical machine learning model.
It's ready.
Please, God.
What will you say if I told you there is an app on the market?
We're past that part. Just demo it.
Okay. Let's start with a hot dog.
Yes!
It works!
Huh?
Huzzah!
Jin Yang, my beautiful little friend, I'm going to buy you the palapa of your life. We will have 12 posts, braided palm leaves. You'll never feel exposed again.
I'm gonna be rich. Foil. Do pizza.
Let's do pizza.
Yeah.
Okay. Pizza.
Not hot dog?
Wait, what the
Eh?
That's it? It only does hot dogs?
No, and a not hot dog.
Okay, so what that was basically showing was that the limitations on the model that they're working with. So I'm just going to show how easy it is to make a model. And I'm using the Create ML tool that comes with the Apple Xcode package. And I'm just going to make a new project for this. And it's going to be an image classifier. Now the Create ML tool can create any number of different types of ML models, but as of right now, FileMaker can only use the image and text tools. There are a variety of them that have to do with linear regression in tables and motion and sound, but I don't think that we can really use those yet. And I'm just showing an image classifier right now. So when you're creating an image classifier, it's basically creating an Xcode project, and I'm just going to call this one. And what you need to do to create a model is you need basically two folders of information. You need training data that has the categories that you want to use, and you need a subset of testing data. There are different places where you can go for data sets. One of the places that I like is, let me move my Chrome here because I can't see my. There's a service called Kaggle, or a website called Kaggle, which has a variety of data sets to it. So you can search for available data sets there. And I was able to find a data set of hot dog and not hot dog images after the Silicon Valley episode. And what this has is two folders of hot dog images and not hot dog images. And there are also two sets. One is a training set and one is a testing set. And I've downloaded those, and I'm going to use those here in Create ML.
Can you speak to the difference between the training and the testing?
Sure. Training data, you tend to want to have as many copies as many files as you can that are fairly exhaustive of what your expected data is going to be. So in this instance, we're not getting we're getting 500 images in of training data. And if we go back to the Finder for a minute, this training data is just separated into two different folders, hot dogs and not hot dogs. I have another example on here, which is rock, paper, scissors. And we've broken that into scissors, rock, and paper. And basically whatever these folders are called in the model is what is going to be used going forward in your model to classify those images. So even though this is a folder full of scissors, if I would have called it shears, when I actually run this Core ML model, it'll refer to them as shears. So you do have to be mindful that your classification system reflects what you want to see going forward. And also, if it is going to be something where you're going to have some automation where this is going to map to an existing folder structure that you have, you're going to want to reflect your taxonomy. So going into this, we have this training data. Create ML takes an automatic subset of that data and creates its own validation set. You don't have to do anything there. And then you need to have a folder of testing data, which uses the same folder structure as your training data, but with different images. So often the testing data is much smaller than the training data. For the rock, paper, scissors example that I used, I had about 3,000 images for the training data and only about 200 images for the testing data. The default is just to go ahead and run this. And this is basically an internal neural net black box that's going to say, what do I need to do to recognize the attributes of this image that would classify it as the folder name that it's under. And this doesn't take very long to run if you're not doing any of these augmentations. The augmentations would be important if the image quality that you expected to work with had a lot of variety, whether it's noisy, blurry photos or different cropping, or the exposures are going to be a lot different or flipped or rotated. So these are all different filters that you can add on when you're creating the model, but each one that you add adds time that it takes to make it. So I'm just going to make this model without checking any of these. And it doesn't take very long. I'm just going to look at the data set, and it's going to identify that there were two classes or two subfolders, hot dog and not hot dog. It's training the model, and then it's internally testing to see if it can improve on itself, and it'll do that up to 25 times. Now it's testing against the test data that I put in. And it says that it thinks it's pretty good, that it thinks that it could recognize hot dogs 98% of the time, and it thinks that it can recognize when something is not a hot dog 94% of the time. When I did this with the rock, paper, scissors file, I came up with the rocks were pretty consistent and the scissors were pretty consistent, but the paper was not. And I had a relatively low precision. So in that case, I went back and did another instance of this just by making a copy of it and adding the additional augmentations to improve the model. And that helped with that. So really that's all that you do here. And it creates this file here. And I've already created one in my folder, so I'm just going to jump over and show that to you. So, well, we'll just drag a new one. We'll take that one. So there we have the new model that we created, and it's pretty quick. So going over to FileMaker, you see I still have my rock, paper, scissors one here. There are a few things that you need to do. The first thing is the model has to be loaded into memory to work. And you can load and unload models into memory. So when a file opens new, you might need to make sure that you're loading it unopened. So in this case, here's where you do it. The model has to be loaded into a container field. I already have my rock, paper, scissors one loaded into the container field. And in this case, we're loading a vision model, and your options here are basically vision or general, which is text. Or if you want to unload your model, you just run this with an unload. You can give it any name you want. and this is the source where we're getting it. And then in the FileMaker file, I just have a few different fields. And it's a container field for the model, container field for my test image. And then here's where the function is that we're actually using. It's called the compute model. And it's going to run my named model, which is a vision model. It's going to run an image function on it, and it's going to use the container field. And this is going to return a piece of JSON. There are some additional controls you can put on this compute model to limit the number of responses or return just one response. But I'm generally returning the entire JSON. And then I'm just parsing out the first response from that. So I'm getting that JSON, returning it as a list, retrieving the first value, and then I'm just putting it into the language so I can use it in the button, because I like to use clean buttons. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and load the new model that we just created, which was this ML model. And we'll load a hot dog image in. Slowly. And see that this blurry hot dog image, it identified as a hot dog with a confidence of 96%. And I just put a little bit of conditional formatting on there, so it's green if it really thinks that it's likely to be that item. So let's put a not hot dog image in. And it's correct. That is not a hot dog based on that model. And just one more. Now, Wim has done a write-up on the Saliant blog, and he refers to some text-based models as well, things that would do things like review movies and see if the review is positive or negative. The results on this one, this is a false positive. This is not a hot dog. This is a birthday cake that we had made for one of my kids. This is sponge cake and cakes and fondant and raspberry. So, you know, you can fool a model. So overall, I think that this is, it's an interesting implementation for FileMaker, and I think we're going to have a variety of interesting use cases. But for right now, I'm kind of waiting to see some compelling cases for it. So that's it for me.
Steve,
yeah.
do you? So right now this is just on Mac products or Mac server because it's using the Apple ML. But
right.
But do you think what are the chances? They could be cross-platform. Is that a really big thing, or is that just a matter of bringing in like an AWS model or something?
Well, I don't think that there's any real difficulty with setting up your own server and using a TensorFlow model and doing it through an API. But I don't think that it's going to happen on device with non-Apple ML at this point.
Okay, and that ML file, it's really small, right? The one you have to store, it looks like it's 24K. Really?
Yeah, but the more data that you're working with and the more parameters, but it's still just text algorithms. There's no image data in there or anything.
Okay.
But when I was doing the rock paper scissors one, I ran it with with that data set that I was talking about, that I had about 2,500 images and there were like 400 test images, and I ran it with none of the augmentations, and it took about the same amount of time, about a minute to run. And then as I added on more augmentations, eventually it got up to about 20 minutes. So that can get a little involved. But if you're working in an environment or a company where you have products that are always shot in the same kind of background, the same kind of framing, I can see where this would be, fantastic for doing auto classification. But if you try any of those, like the Apple models that exist, these are all, you can just direct download these from the Apple machine learning section. This MobileNet, ResNet, and SqueezeNet are the ones that I've seen people use. One of the problems with these are they are so broad and so generic that your confidence in the classifications are going to be a lot lower than if you really have fine control over the homogeneity of your items. But these are good to play with, so I suggest you load these.
Steve, First, I really love the way you put this together. I love the Silicon Valley reference and then you building it again. I just think that's really clever. What I'm struggling with is use cases and coming up with use cases and kind of being future thinking and wondering who clients are, they're going to want this and all the rest of it. Do you have any recommendations for expanding our imagination around that? Places to, things to look at, or I don't know, because I feel very stuck kind of managing office information right now.
Well, I haven't really done much with the text recognition. I think the example that Claris had of having the auto parts recognition is actually is a great example. But again, you do have to do the work of actually building the model. And I just don't see that there's a tremendous library of existing models that are going to map extremely well for clients' use cases.
Thank you. I
also did an example with some, there's an available data set of COVID-19 lungs, healthy and diseased lungs. And, I'm not, I don't do any medical work. I don't do any HIPAA information, but, that's an interesting case of just being able to, analyze an image and see whether it has disease characteristics. So, there's plenty of use cases.
Anybody else have any questions for Steve? Or any questions for Mark?
No questions, but really cool stuff that we've seen today. Pretty amazing.
Okay, yeah, I definitely want to thank Mark Baum from Soliant and Steve Gleason for doing the presentation today. Really appreciate it. And I want to thank everybody for attending the webinar on Claris FileMaker 19.